We made this.
Hello everyone and welcome back to Blair Witch Minute, a podcast looking at 1999's seminal found footage horror movie, The Blair Witch Project, 1 minute at a time. I'm your host, Tony Black, and this minute begins at 1 minute precisely as we see Heather Donahue come into focus and ends on 1 minute 59 seconds with Josh asking where Mike is. Well, I know where Mike is. He's right here. He's my guest, Mike Jozic. It's great to have you back on the show, Mike.
Great to
be back. Or should I say Mike? Should I say Mike? Mike? Yeah. Anyway, I'm amazed it's taken us 2 whole minutes to do a Mike joke. Actually,
I was holding off.
Well, obviously this is the minute where we start to get introduced to some of our characters. But it's firstly Heather, and it's a blurry opening, and we see through her colour camcorder basically that she's being shot by somebody, and she comes into focus and we see it's Heather introducing us to her home basically. Now I as it turns out, I think the voice of the person behind the camera is someone connected to the production crew, but I always wondered who is holding the camera, because it's not Josh at that point, it's not Mike, so is it Heather's boyfriend, dad? You know, I always wonder that, you know, because she's at her home and somebody else is there with her, but you never really get any context for that.
I always assumed it was just like a friend or family member that was home as they were setting off. Because this is like, it's the weekend, right? They're taking the weekend to go out into the woods and get these shots. So yeah, I just figured it was whoever was, you know, up and seeing them off for the weekend. But yeah, it turns out it's like the producer's assistant or production assistant or something.
Yeah, yeah, who's using the camera and it's their voice. But you don't hear you hear it much. The whole point of this is more to establish the sense of. I think it's establishing how far they're going to go. I think as characters, isn't it? You start in the home, in Heather's home, which is a normal apartment or whatever, and all the usual, you know, late 90s modcoms. And I think it's good, isn't it, to do this, Mike, to have it open with some sense of where they've come from before they go into this nightmarish world.
Yeah, I mean, you have to introduce the characters in a way that gives you some empathy for them. Like, you have to see them being normal so that you realize just how upside down their world gets.
It's a good, but you know, I suppose other films could have just dropped them in the woods. It could have just started with them in the woods and had all that. But I think Blair Witch really benefits from having a good 5 to 10 minutes or more of getting to know the characters a little bit, seeing their interaction, seeing where they've come from, and learning a little bit about the deeper mythology.
It's interesting also, like, yes, they're setting up the characters, but the economy with which they do it, like, they could have spent 40 minutes introducing you to every character and explaining to you their, you know, life history and their motivations, and why is Heather so interested in the Blair Witch, and, you know, what is her relationship to Josh, and why is Josh helping her, and, you know, introduce her family or anybody's family so that, you know, I mean, you mentioned, you know, in the documentary or in the trailer the comment about, you know, were supernatural forces involved with your son going missing. Like, all that stuff could have been put at the front end of the film to manipulate the emotions of the audience into empathizing and sort of building some of that dread. But it's literally like, we're just going to show you, I think it's a couple minutes introducing the characters. They give you the names. They introduce the dynamic between the characters really efficiently, and you kind of understand that, not necessarily, you know, the life history between Heather and Josh, but you know that they know each other and they're familiar with each other and they have some history, and that Mike is somebody who's sort of a rogue element, someone who they don't know very well, but who has, the sound equipment and is coming to help them out. And I mean, really, that's all you kind of need to know. And it also helps. I keep using this phrase, and I probably will continue to use the phrase, but perpetuating the conceit of reality. To do any more would probably burst that bubble. It would seem too manipulative. It would seem too narrative. So they're walking that line, and I think it's really effective because everything you kind of need to know is distilled for these characters, for starting out anyways, in this minute and the minute following.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it is. It establishes Heather's, I think, already sort of determination and, apparent research, because obviously what we find out later is that maybe Heather hasn't quite done her homework in the way that she should have done going into this situation. But she's got these books. She's got things like How to Stay Alive in the Woods by Bradford Archer, which is a book that goes back to, I think it was 1956 when it was first published, and this is a well-known book that is used by many people who go into woods and go camping and things like that. And she's very flippant. This establishes Heather's flippancy at the beginning, because she says, because you never know what's going to happen. So my immediate question is, has she ever even read it? Has she collected books like that because she thinks she should have them? Has she really gone into depth about what could happen? There's a level of flippancy about it, in that she doesn't think anything's going to happen. She thinks everything's going to be fine. And that's something you get in these opening minutes. They are completely out of their depth. And then the other books that establish things like the All-Weather Backcountry Notebook, and the quite an arcane old book that's got the title worn away, which is interesting, but it's got the article about what happened at Coffin Rock. So these things as well sort of add to that sense of world building, as well as getting to know the characters. I think seeing these kind of books, which are journals to try and help with the actual filming and the knowledge, trying to think about how to be safe in the woods, even though that's not necessarily very, very thought out. I mean, I think it's a good visual. I think there are some good visual aspects here, and some good, very economical ways of setting out certain things we need to know, or certain character aspects we need to know for what's going to come next.
I'm stuck on this idea. If this movie was released in the 80s, and you'd have that trailer voice saying, maybe Heather didn't do her homework like she should have.
Oh, the trailer guy voice. We did, for my other podcast, Motion Pictures, recently, we did an episode on Christopher Nolan for Tenet coming out, because we were recording around the time Tenet's come out. And it was we watched Insomnia from 2002, and that has... We watched the trailer. We got the trailer for that, and that has Trailer Guy. And I hadn't thought of Trailer Guy for years. And it's like, he's in the Alaskan wilderness, but there's a killer. I love it. So good.
It is true what you said. It's true. It's true what you said about the visual kind of storytelling, which, again, for me, it connects to the process, because you know that they might have given the actors some instruction, like maybe we need some shots of the books, or maybe the actors just chose to shoot the books and the directors are assembling a narrative based on the footage that they have from the house. By admission, the directors are apparently in a car outside with binoculars watching the events, or trying to watch the events, and hoping that the actors are actually getting anything useful. But to show the books, it shows that Heather has an interest that is, something that you think that at least it's enough for her to have researched, to have gone and found some books. I mean, Heather's hubris is something that kind of feeds into the film as you go on, and you'll probably talk about many minutes down the road. But the fact that, like you said, she's only got a couple of the books, and you're not sure if she's actually read the books, and this is all stuff that you probably think about more on a second viewing or a third viewing, but the information is there, which is, again, a testament, I think, to the filmmakers. And I guess we should probably give the actors some credit.
I think definitely in their performance styles. I think from right from the beginning here. I mean, we haven't quite met Mike yet, but we've met we meet Josh as well, and Heather jokingly says, "Oh, Mr. Punctuality," and he apparently Joshua Leonard himself was a bit late for the filming and things like that. But you get a sense that they are playing. I always get a sense they're playing sort of extensions of who they are, in many ways. In that, I think Heather Donahue was probably someone who was quite committed to her acting craft and really wanted to pursue a career, and is maybe quite determined and intense about that. Joshua Leonard is somebody who, by his own admission, says, "I didn't have a laser focus about being an actor. I was 21, stoned, and living in New York." And there's a story about later on that they had to film they got his scenes out the way before he was leaving filming because he had a Jane's Addiction concert he didn't want to miss. So, maybe they have certain different, and I think that bleeds in a little bit into the characters. And I think, you meet Josh here as someone who's pretty complacent, who's pretty he's the guy who's got who's bringing the tech. But there's something a little bit, even shady about him, because he basically says that he's stolen the camera.
Yeah.
He says no one knows I took it, which is an interesting point people miss. It's like we know later on in the film that Josh is worried about getting the camera back, but it's almost easy to miss that he hasn't been given this camera to use. He's basically taken this old, CP for this project that his friend has roped him into, and he shouldn't have taken it. So I think there's these little shades of character that come out really well even in these opening minutes.
And it also creates, it's a reason for Josh to have something to sort of, what's the word I'm looking for? It's a level of stakes. Like, he's invested in that camera, so that's something that it gives him something to focus on out in the woods when things are going down, and he doesn't want to just leave without it.
Yeah. It's good in that sense to build up a sense of narrative tension, I guess, there. But I think as well, this is a good way because you see both cameras, don't you? You see them both shooting each other through the camcorder, the modern smaller camcorder, which is in colour video, and then the CP16, which is black and white. So I think it's a good way, when they're joking around by the car and they're filming each other. It identifies which lens you're looking at whenever you've got these cameras on. So if it's black and white, it's going to be Josh holding it. If it's colour, it's going to be Heather holding it. For the most part. Because Mike's the sound guy, isn't he? He's the guy with the boom. So it's like, I think that's a clever way of establishing who's got these cameras and the differences that the film will later switch between in terms of how it's filmed.
It's also a brilliant way to sort of establish the conceit of the film, where someone has to be filming in order for you to see what's going on in the film. It's something that a lot of found footage films struggle with, and I think a lot of found footage films don't succeed at. And with this one, there's even a line in a later minute where she wants Josh to test the camera, but she's like, don't shoot too much film. Like, just shoot, a little bit, because, of course, they're going out into the woods and they only have a limited supply of film. But she's got the camcorder, and the camcorder, it's probably still using tapes, but, if they're desperate, they could always, record over a tape, or they might have, dozens of tapes in a bag, or but that camcorder is the one that's sort of the one that's always on. It's the one that Heather is using to document the journey, and I mean, they're doing something for them that, or at least for Heather, it has some historical value for her. It's something, she wants to make this documentary, she wants to put this thing out and get known for it and explore this history and whatever. So she's got the camera and she's shooting her friends and probably thinking in terms of some behind the scenes footage, and it makes sense for her to have the camera and to have it running for as long as it does. And that, on top of being able to switch between the two cameras and get the different sort of visual looks, because there's a textural and tonal difference between Josh's camera and her camera, and it has narrative value, and it's something that you probably don't think about on a first viewing, but just seeing how the pieces are coming together and the narrative tools are being introduced, and then the stylistic opportunities that it provides. I think it's brilliant.
Yeah, it's very clever. It's a very good way to establish, these aspects, really. And that's where the minute ends. Really, it's sort of establishing Mike. It's Josh asking, "Well, where's Mike?" And that's where we're going to roll into in the next minute. So we'll leave it there for this one, and we'll come back very soon. So thanks again, Mike, for joining me on this, and you'll be back for minute 3.
Sounds great.
Yeah, and until then, remember, you can find us on Twitter at Blair Witch Minute, and you can find our podcast network we're part of, We Made This, at wemadethis.com, and We Made This on Twitter. And we'll give you a little sneak peek about what else is on the network, because we've got other stuff going on in a second. But until next time, thank you again for listening to us on the journey, and stay out of those woods. Elsewhere on We Made This. We are Starfleet.
Honestly, it felt so great to see the Starship Discovery again.
Yeah, out of the frying pan and into the fire.
Right into the fire. So in our previous episode, I had commented on how I felt like all the dramatic tension that the writers built up with Burnham falling kind of felt like, all right. But here, I felt the exact opposite. It just seemed like the right blend of tension and risk and what's at stake.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head, and I think there's a couple of reasons for this. One, I think
the giddy carousel of pop.
So there's one particular thing where I think Sylvia just nails the Mannix, absolutely nails them, and nails them to this day. And she says, the Mannix mission is a simple one. They want to make music exciting, glamorous and interesting again. Make people wake up out of the boredom and meaninglessness of 20th century life and jump up and down to some good old rock and roll music and think about things and have a laugh, because at the end of the day, none of us will ever be happy. And I had to have everything about them immediately.
The Movie Palace.
Before we even think about the book, I suppose, were you coming to this as a Marilyn Monroe fan, particularly?
No, not at all. In fact, I'll admit, it's very awful, but I knew almost nothing about Marilyn Monroe. I knew of her. She's a cultural icon.
Yeah.
I would say she's even gone beyond that now, and she's almost a symbol. So I knew of her. I had seen a few movies that she'd been in, although, to be honest, whenever I watched those movies, I wasn't really focusing on her because she was sort of in the background.
Check out all of these shows and more on the We Made This podcast network.